The coffee shop on Maple Street had become my second office. Every Tuesday and Thursday, at exactly 2:15 p.m., I'd claim the corner table by the window, laptop open, pretending to work on freelance articles, while actually watching the world pass by. It was a routine that kept me sane after the divorce. A small anchor in a life that had been turned upside down 6 months ago. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. That's when I first noticed her. She always ordered the same thing, a medium cappuccino, extra foam, no sugar. Always sat 3 tables away from mine, always facing the door like she was expecting someone who never came. Her auburn hair was usually pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore clothes that suggested she'd once cared deeply about her appearance, but had recently stopped trying so hard. Designer jeans, but wrinkled. Expensive handbag, but scuffed. At the corners, I'm not usually the type to notice details about strangers, but there was something about the way she held her coffee cup that caught my attention. Both hands wrapped around it, like she was trying to absorb every bit of warmth it could offer. Her eyes had this distant quality, like she was looking at something far beyond the busy street outside. For 3 weeks, we existed in this parallel routine. Me at my corner table, her at hers. Neither of us acknowledging the other, but both of us seeming to find comfort in the predictability of it all. I started calling her Tuesday Girl in my head, though I knew she came on Thursdays to dot my name. Is Marcus, by the way. Marcus Bennett. He's 38 years old, recently divorced, freelance journalist trying to figure out what comes next. My ex-wife Sarah took the house, the car, and most of our mutual friends. Kept the debt and a 1-bedroom apartment above a hardware store in downtown Millbrook, Connecticut. Not exactly the life I'd planned at 18, but it was mine. The day everything changed started like any other Thursday. October was settling in, painting the maple trees along the street in shades of gold and crimson. I was nursing my second black coffee and staring at a blank document titled Local Business Spotlight Henderson's Hardware when she walked in. But this time was different. Instead of her usual composed entrance, she looked frazzled. Her hair was loose, falling in waves around her shoulders, and her eyes were rimmed with red. She ordered her cappuccino, but when the barista asked if she wanted extra foam, she just stared at him for a long moment before nodding. She sat down at her usual table, but instead of facing the door, she turned her chair toward the window, toward me. For the first time in 3 weeks, our eyes met. I should have looked away. That would have been the polite thing to do. Instead, I found myself studying her face, trying to read the story written in the lines around her eyes. Oh, the set of her shoulders, the way she kept running her fingers through her hair. She caught me staring. Instead of looking away or giving me one of those mind-your-own-business glares, she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not a happy smile, but the kind of smile someone gives when they recognize a fellow member of some unspoken club. The recently wounded society, maybe. That's when she got up and walked over to my table. I'm sorry to bother you, she said, her voice softer than I'd expected. But you look like someone who might understand what it's like to sit in coffee shops, because home doesn't feel like home anymore. I gestured to the empty chair across from me. Sarah took the good coffee maker in the divorce. This place has better Wi-Fi than my apartment anyway. She sat down, extending her hand. I'm Rebecca. Rebecca Walsh. Marcus Bennett. Her handshake was firm, confident. The kind of handshake that belonged to someone who was used to being in control. But something in her eyes suggested that control had been recently shattered. I've been watching you too, she admitted, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup again. You always sit in the same spot. Always order black coffee. Always look like you're trying to solve the world's problems on that laptop. Mostly just trying to solve my own problems. The world will have to wait. She laughed, and it was the first genuine sound I'd heard from her. How's that working out for you? About as well as you'd expect. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us looking out the window at the afternoon traffic. It was strange how natural it felt, talking to someone I'd never spoken to before, but had been sharing space with for weeks. Can I ask you something? Rebecca said suddenly. And please, feel free to tell me it's none of my business. I nodded. How long did it take you to stop checking your phone, hoping they'd call? The question hit me harder than I expected. For months. You still working on it? She pulled her phone from her purse and set it face down on the table. 22 years of marriage, and I still reach for it every time I hear a notification sound. 22 years. I did the math in my head. If she was in her 40s, she must have gotten married young. High school sweethearts, maybe, or college. The kind of love story that's supposed to last forever. What happened? Asked, then immediately regretted it. Sorry, that's too personal. No, it's okay. She took a long sip of her cappuccino. Actually, it's refreshing to have someone ask directly instead of dancing around it. My husband, ex-husband, as of 2 weeks ago, decided he needed to find himself with his 28-year-old marketing assistant. The bitterness in her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I'm sorry, don't be. Be sorry that people can be cruel and selfish, but don't be sorry for me. I'm done being sorry for myself. She straightened in her chair, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of who she might have been before her world fell apart. I spent 6 months crying, 3 months angry, and the last month planning. Planning what? How to forget, how to move forward, how to become someone completely different from the woman who spent 2 decades making pot roast on Sundays and pretending not to notice when he came home late with lipstick on his collar. There was something both heartbreaking and inspiring about the way she said it, like she was declaring war on her old life. And how's that plan working out? She smiled again, but this time it was different, determined. That's actually why I came over here. I've been watching you for weeks, and you seem like someone who's figured out how to rebuild. Someone who's learned how to sit with uncertainty without falling apart. I almost laughed. I eat cereal for dinner 3 nights a week and haven't changed my sheets in 2 weeks. I'm not sure I'm the poster child for successful rebuilding, but you're here. You show up. You keep writing, even when the words don't. Come easy. You don't look like someone who's given up. I studied her face, trying to understand where this conversation was heading. There was something she wasn't saying, something she was building up to. Rebecca, what are you really asking? Me. She was quiet for a long moment, running her finger around the rim of her coffee cup. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were steady, resolved. I'm 46 years old, and my marriage is over. My kids are in college, my friends all knew about the affair before I did. And I just signed papers that divided up a life I thought would last forever. She paused, taking a deep breath. I don't want to spend the next 40 years remembering what it felt like to be chosen second. I want to remember what it feels like to be chosen first. The coffee shop seemed to fade around. Us. Even the usual afternoon bustle of students and business people felt distant. I'm not talking about a relationship, she continued quickly. I'm not ready for that, and I don't think you are either. But I am talking about remembering what it feels like to matter to someone. To be seen as more than just a mistake or a casualty. My heart was beating faster, though I wasn't entirely sure why. What exactly are you asking me, Rebecca? She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. I'm asking if you'd be willing to help me forget who I used to be, just for a while, long enough to remember who I might become. The question hung in the air between us, like smoke. Outside, the October afternoon was fading into evening, and the coffee shop was beginning to empty. But at our table in the corner, time seemed to have stopped completely. I looked into Rebecca Walsh's eyes and realized that whatever I said next would change everything. For both of us, I didn't answer Rebecca's question that day. How could I? Someone you've never really spoken to doesn't just ask you to help them forget their past over coffee on a Thursday afternoon. At least that's what I told myself as I walked home through the crisp October evening. Her words echoing in my head. But I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd said it. Not desperate, not broken, but with the quiet determination of someone who had already decided to jump and was just looking for someone to jump with. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my sister Emma. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emma lived in Boston with her husband David and their twin boys. She was 3 years older than me, and had always been the one with her life together. While I was bouncing between journalism jobs and questionable relationships, she was building a successful career in marketing and creating the kind of stable family I'd always envied. "Marcus, is everything okay?" Her voice was immediately concerned. I didn't call Emma unless something was wrong. Define okay. What happened now? Found myself walking around my small apartment, looking out at the streetlights, reflecting. Off the wet pavement. A woman asked me to help her forget her marriage. There was a pause. I'm going to need more context than that. So I told her about Rebecca. About the coffee shop routine. About the conversation. About the way she'd looked at me when she asked her question. Emma listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. "Marcus," she said when I finished, "this woman is asking you to be her rebound." No, she specifically said she wasn't talking about a relationship. "Honey, she's talking about an emotional affair with someone who's also vulnerable. Trust me, I've seen this before." Emma had divorced her first husband when she was 28. She'd told me once that the year after her divorce was filled with decisions she later regretted. It's relationships that were more about proving she was desirable than about actually connecting with someone. "What if she's not?" I asked. "What if she just needs a friend who understands what it's like to have your life fall apart?" "Oh, then why didn't she ask for friendship? Why did she ask you to help her forget?" I didn't have an answer for that. "Marcus, I love you, but you're still healing from Sarah. The last thing you need is to get tangled up with someone else who's in crisis." After I hung up, I sat on my couch with a beer and really thought about my marriage for the first time in weeks. Sarah and I had met in college. She was studying education, I was studying journalism, and we both believed we were going to change the world. We got married at 25, bought a house at 28, and spent the next decade slowly growing apart without really noticing. The problems started small. She wanted kids. I wanted to travel. She wanted stability. I wanted adventure. She wanted dinner parties with our neighbors. I wanted quiet nights at home. None of these were deal breakers on their own, but they accumulated like snow on a roof. Until one day, the weight became too much. The actual end came last winter. I'd been offered a freelance assignment in Portland that would have lasted 3 months. Good money, great story, the kind of opportunity I'd been waiting for. Sarah said if I took it, I shouldn't bother coming back. I took it. When I returned, she'd already filed the papers. No fight, no counseling, no discussion. Just a lawyer's letter and a list of things I could take from the house. She kept everything we'd built together, and I started over in a 1-bedroom apartment with furniture. From goodwill and a bank account that barely covered my rent, the strangest part wasn't the anger or the sadness. It was the relief. For the first time in years, I could make decisions without having to consider someone else's opinion. I could eat cereal for dinner, work until 2 a.m., or spend an entire Saturday reading without feeling guilty about it. But Rebecca was right about one thing. I had learned to sit with uncertainty without falling apart. Maybe that was worth something. Friday morning, I went to the coffee shop earlier than usual, hoping to catch her before her normal time. She wasn't there. I ordered my black coffee and sat at my usual table, trying to focus on an article about local small businesses. But my eyes kept drifting to her empty table. She didn't come. Saturday and Sunday passed without any sign of her. By Monday, I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined the whole conversation. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe I was so starved for human connection that I'd misread a simple moment of shared loneliness. Tuesday arrived, gray and drizzling. I almost didn't go to the coffee shop, but old habits die hard. I grabbed my laptop and headed out into the miserable weather. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a different table this time. One closer to mine. She was reading a paperback novel, something with a bright yellow cover. And she'd ordered tea instead of coffee. I ordered my usual and sat down, stealing glances at her while pretending to work. She was wearing a red sweater that looked new, and her hair was different too, shorter, more styled, like she'd decided to make some changes. After about 20 minutes, she closed her book and walked over to my table. "I owe you an apology," she said, sitting down without being invited. "What I asked you on Thursday was unfair. I put you in an impossible position. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. I've been thinking about it all weekend, and I realized how selfish it was. You don't know me. You don't know my story. And I essentially ask you to be responsible for my emotional recovery. She shook her head. That's not fair to either of us. I closed my laptop and looked at her directly. What if I said yes? Blinked, clearly not expecting that response. What? What if I said yes? Not to whatever you think you were asking for, but to being friends with someone who understands what it's like to rebuild a life from scratch. She was quiet for a moment, studying my face. Why would you want to do that? 'Cause for the first time in 6 months, someone looked at me and saw something other than a guy whose wife left him. You saw someone who might actually have figured something out. I paused. And because I think you might be the first person I've met who's brave enough to admit that healing isn't pretty or predictable. A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. So what are you proposing exactly? I don't know yet. But I know that Thursday afternoon was the first time I felt like myself in months. Not divorced Marcus, not failed husband Marcus, just Marcus. That's worth exploring. She reached across the table and extended her hand. Rebecca Walsh, 46. Years old, recently divorced, still figuring out who she is without someone else's expectations defining her. I shook her hand. Marcus Bennett. 38 years old, recently divorced, surprisingly okay with uncertainty. Nice to meet you. Marcus Bennett. Nice to meet you too, Rebecca Walsh. She gathered her things and stood up. Same time, Thursday, I'll be here. She walked toward the door, then turned back. Marcus, thank you for not making me feel crazy. After she left, I sat in the coffee shop for another hour, not working, just thinking. Emma would probably say I was making a mistake. Sarah would definitely say I was being irresponsible. But for the first time since my divorce, I felt like I was making a choice based on possibility rather than fear. I didn't know what Rebecca Walsh really wanted from me or what I could offer her. But I knew that sometimes the best friendships begin with someone brave enough to ask for help, and someone else brave enough to say yes. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. I found myself checking my watch every few minutes, distracted from work, unable to concentrate on anything except the prospect of continuing whatever had started between Rebecca and me. It wasn't romantic anticipation exactly, but it wasn't purely platonic either. It was something else entirely, something I didn't have words for yet. When I arrived at the coffee shop at 2:15, she was already there, but this time she'd claimed a table in the back corner, away from the window, more private. She was wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored blouse, and she'd brought a manila folder with her. I have a proposition, she said, as I sat down with my coffee. I'm listening. She opened the folder and pulled out a handwritten list. Her handwriting was precise, measured, like someone who'd spent years taking careful notes. I've been thinking about what you said, about healing not being pretty or predictable, and I realized something. She slid the list across the table. At the top, in capital letters, she'd written, "Things Richard never let me do." I scanned the items. Some were small. Sleep in past 7 a.m. on weekends. Order dessert first, were bright colors. Others were bigger. Take a pottery class. Drive to the coast alone. Dance in public. Stay out past midnight. Make friends he didn't approve of. 22 years, she said quietly. 22 years of being told these things were impractical, or embarrassing, or inappropriate for a woman my age. 22 years of making myself smaller to fit into his idea of who a proper wife should be. I looked up from the list and said I want to do every single one of them. Not to spite him, but to remember who I was before I started asking permission. To live my own life. She leaned forward. I want someone to witness it. Someone who won't judge me for wanting to eat ice cream for breakfast or dance badly to music that's too loud. You want a witness to your rebellion? I want a friend who remembers what it feels like to choose joy over convention. The way she said it made something shift in my chest. This wasn't about forgetting her marriage. This was about remembering herself. When do we start? Her smile was brilliant. How about right now? She stood up and walked to the coffee shop's small speaker system, which was playing quiet jazz. The owner, Mrs. Chen, looked up from behind the counter as Rebecca approached. "Excuse me, could you turn this up? Maybe play something with a little more energy?" Mrs. Chen looked confused but obliged. Within seconds, an upbeat pop song filled the space. The handful of other customers looked around uncertainly. Rebecca walked back to our table, extended her hand to me and said, "Dance with me." "Here. Now, item number 8. Dance in public." "I've never done it." Richard said it was undignified. I looked around the coffee shop. A college student with headphones was typing furiously on her laptop. An elderly man was reading a newspaper. 2 women in business suits were having what looked like a serious conversation. None of them were paying any attention to us. "Rebecca, I should mention that I'm a terrible dancer." "Perfect." "So am I." I took her hand and stood up. We moved to the small open space near the counter, and she placed her other hand on my shoulder. We swayed awkwardly to the music, both of us laughing at our own stiffness. "This is ridiculous," she whispered. "Completely ridiculous," I agreed. But we kept dancing. And somewhere in the middle of the song, something loosened in both of us. Her movements became more natural, less self-conscious. I stopped worrying about what we looked like and started focusing on the way she threw her head back when she laughed. When the song ended, the college student actually applauded. The elderly man smiled and nodded approvingly. Mrs. Chen was grinning. Behind the counter, how did that feel? I asked as we sat back down. It's terrifying, embarrassing, absolutely wonderful. She crossed dance in public off her list with a flourish. What's next? That became our pattern. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we'd meet at the coffee shop and tackle something from Rebecca's list, sometimes multiple things in one afternoon. Following Tuesday, we ordered dessert first at a restaurant downtown. Rebecca got chocolate cake before her salad and spent the entire meal giggling like a teenager about how wrong it felt and how right it felt at the same time. Thursday, we went to a pottery studio. Rebecca had always wanted to try it, but Richard had said it was messy and impractical. She was terrible at it. We both were. Her bowl looked more like a misshapen ashtray, and my attempt at a vase could have been mistaken for abstract art, but watching her concentrate on the clay, her tongue poking out slightly in determination, I realized I hadn't seen anyone so focused on pure joy in years. "I'm going to take classes," she announced, as we washed clay from our hands. "Real classes, every week." "Richard's not here to stop you anymore." She paused, her hands still under the running water. "It's strange, isn't it? Stop asking permission from someone who's no longer in your life." I understood exactly what she meant. I'd caught myself several times over the past few weeks starting to text Sarah about something before remembering we weren't married anymore. The habits of partnership die hard, even when the partnership itself is dead, by the end of October. We'd made significant progress through Rebecca's list. She'd worn a bright red dress to the grocery store, stayed out past midnight at a local jazz club, and driven to the coast alone on a Sunday morning. I'd become her willing accomplice in each adventure. And somewhere along the way, something had shifted between us. It wasn't romance exactly. But it wasn't just friendship either. There was an intimacy in witnessing someone's deliberate transformation, in being trusted with their most vulnerable moments of growth. When Rebecca laughed, really laughed, I felt like I was seeing something precious that had been hidden away for too long. The complications started in early November. I was having lunch with my friend Jake when he brought up Rebecca. Jake worked at the bank downtown and had apparently seen us together multiple times. "So who's the redhead?" he asked over his sandwich. "Just a friend, huh? The kind of friend you hold hands with while walking down Main Street?" I thought back to the previous Thursday. We'd been walking to the bookstore, and Rebecca had grabbed my hand when she got excited about something. It felt natural, comfortable. I hadn't thought about how it might look to others. It's not what you think, Marcus. I'm not judging. But you might want to be careful. Small towns talk, and from what I hear, her divorce wasn't exactly amicable. That evening, I called Emma again. "She has a list," I explained. "Things her ex-husband never let her do. We're just working through it together." "Marcus, listen to yourself. You're having an emotional affair with a woman who's using you to prove something to her ex-husband. It's not about her ex-husband. It's about her finding herself again." "What? What about you finding yourself?" When's the last time you did something on that list that was just for you? I didn't have an answer for that. The real complication came the following Tuesday. Rebecca arrived at the coffee shop 30 minutes late, and when she sat down, I could see she'd been crying. What happened? Richard showed up at my house last night. My stomach dropped. What did he want? He wanted to talk. It's about us trying again. About how maybe we'd both learned from our mistakes. She laughed bitterly. Apparently, Linda, his marketing assistant, turned out to be more interested in his money than his charming personality. Who could have seen that coming? What did you tell him? I told him no. Absolutely not. That I was finally happy, finally myself again. She looked directly at me, and then he asked about you. About me? He said he'd heard I was spending time with some divorced journalist. He wanted to know if that's why I was refusing to reconcile. Implications hit me like a cold wind. What did you say? I told him the truth, that you were my friend, that you were helping me remember who I am. She paused. But Marcus, I don't think he believed me, and I don't think he's going to let this go. Over the next week, the pressure began to mount from multiple directions. Emma called twice more, each time more insistent that I was making a mistake. Jake mentioned that people around town were talking about Rebecca and me as if we were a couple, and then, on Thursday, I got a call I wasn't expecting. This Marcus Bennett? The voice was unfamiliar, professional. Yes. This is Richard Walsh. I think we need to talk. My heart started racing. I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mr. Walsh. I think we do. You see, my wife has been going through a difficult time since our separation. She's been making some poor decisions, and I'm concerned that certain people might be taking advantage of her vulnerability. The accusation was clear, even if he hadn't stated it directly. Rebecca is a grown woman capable of making her own choices. Rebecca is emotionally fragile and susceptible to manipulation by men who see an opportunity. That's not what this is. Then what is it, Mr. Bennett? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're encouraging my wife to destroy her life just to prove a point. I wanted to tell him that Rebecca wasn't his wife anymore. I wanted to tell him that she was happier than she'd been in years. I wanted to tell him that his opinion no longer mattered. Instead, I said, I think you should talk to Rebecca about your concerns. Well, I plan to. But I thought you might want to consider whether helping a confused woman rebel against her marriage is really the kind of man you want to be. After he hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at the phone. For the first time since this whole thing started, I wondered if everyone else was right. Was I taking advantage of Rebecca's vulnerability? Was I encouraging her to make decisions she might regret later? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the way Rebecca had looked when she crossed items off her list. The pure joy in her face when she tried something new, I thought. About how alive she seemed compared to the withdrawn woman I'd first noticed in the coffee shop. But I also thought about Richard's words, about the possibility that I was just another mistake in a year full of them. Friday morning I decided not to go to the coffee shop. I needed space to think, to figure out what I really wanted from this friendship and what I was willing to risk for it. My phone buzzed at 2:30. A text from Rebecca. Where are you? We have pottery class at 3. I stared at the message for a long time before responding. Can't make it today. Sorry. She texted back immediately. Everything okay? I turned off my phone without answering. That weekend I stayed home and tried to write. But every time I sat down at my laptop, I found myself thinking about Rebecca instead. About the way she laughed when she was genuinely happy. About how she'd slowly been transforming from someone who apologized for taking up space into someone who embraced it. By Sunday evening, I realized that everyone else's opinions didn't matter. What mattered was that, for the first time in months, I felt like I had a purpose. Rebecca wasn't using me, and I wasn't taking advantage of her. We were two people helping each other remember what it felt like to be fully alive. But I also realized that whatever was happening between us was about to get a lot more complicated. Because Richard Walsh wasn't going to give up, and a small town like Millbrook wasn't going to stop talking, and sooner or later, Rebecca and I were going to have to decide what we were really doing and what we were willing to sacrifice for it. Monday. Morning arrived with the first real snow of the season, fat, wet flakes that clung to the windows and made the world look softer around the edges. I'd spent the weekend in a strange state of suspended animation, avoiding my phone. avoiding the coffee shop, avoiding any decision about what to do next. But by 10 a.m., I couldn't avoid it anymore. My phone had 17 missed calls and 12 text messages, all from Rebecca. The messages started concerned. "Marcus, are you okay? You missed pottery class." Then worried, "Please just let me know you're alive." Then hurt, "Did I do something wrong?" And finally determined, "I'm coming over." The last message was time-stamped 20 minutes ago. I was still in my pajamas when the knock came at my door. Through the peephole, I could see Rebecca standing in the hallway, snow melting in her hair, holding 2 coffee cups and a paper bag. "Brought breakfast," she said when I opened the door. "And I'm not leaving until you tell me what's going on." She pushed past me into the apartment, setting the coffee and food on my small kitchen table. She was wearing the red dress from her list, the one she'd been too scared to wear to the grocery store just a few weeks ago. Now she wore it like armor. "Nice pajamas," she said, taking in my rumpled appearance. "Very professional writer chic, Rebecca. I know, you don't get to disappear without explanation. Not after everything we've shared. Not after you made me believe that friendship means showing up even when it's hard." She was right, and I knew it. I sat down across from her at the table, accepting the coffee she'd brought me. Black, the way I liked it. "Richard called me," I said. Finally, her face went very still. "What did he say?" I told her about the conversation, about his accusations, about the way he'd made me question everything. As I talked, I watched her expression change from surprise to anger to something I couldn't quite identify. "And you believed him?" she said when I finished. It wasn't a question. I believed that maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was encouraging you to make decisions you'll regret later. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "Marcus, can I tell you about my marriage?" "The real story, not the cleaned-up version I tell people." I nodded. "Richard and I met when I was 24. I was working as a graphic designer for a small firm, living in an apartment with 2 roommates, trying to figure out my life. He was 32, established, confident. He had opinions about everything, and at first I found that attractive. He seemed so sure of himself, so certain about what was right and wrong." She took a sip of coffee before continuing. "The control started small. He didn't like my friends. They were too wild, too unpredictable. He didn't like my apartment. It was too messy, too chaotic. He didn't like my job. He didn't pay enough, didn't offer security. At first I thought he was just looking out for me. I could see where this was going, but I let her tell it. Within 2 years, I'd quit my job too. Work at his accounting firm. I'd moved in with him. I'd lost touch with most of my friends. But I told myself it was love. I told myself that compromise was what mature relationships looked like." She stood up and walked to my small window, looking out at the snow. By the time I realized what had happened, I was 30 years old and I couldn't remember the last time. I'd made a decision without consulting him first. What to wear, what to eat, who to spend time with, how to spend my free time. Everything required his approval. "Why didn't you leave?" "Because I'd forgotten who I was without him." I'd been Rebecca Walsh, Richard's wife, for so long that I couldn't remember who Rebecca had been before that. She turned back to face me, because he was very good at making me believe that I needed him, that I was too emotional, too impulsive, too naive to make good decisions on my own. The pain in her voice was raw, immediate. "The affair wasn't the end of our marriage, Marcus. It was just the excuse I needed to finally admit that our marriage had ended years ago. It had never really begun. It had just been a very long audition for a role I was never going to be good enough to play." She sat back down at the table, reaching across to take my hand. "So when Richard called you and suggested that I'm too fragile to make my own choices, he was doing exactly what he's always done. He was trying to control the narrative. He was trying to convince you that I'm not capable of knowing what I want or what's good for me." I felt something heavy settle in my stomach. "And I let him. You let him because you care about me, because you don't want to hurt me. But Marcus, the thing that would hurt me most is if you decided that everyone else knows what's best for me, better than I do." She squeezed my hand. "I'm 46 years old. I've made mistakes, and I'll probably make more. But for the first time in 20 years, they'll be my mistakes, my choices, my life. We sat in silence for a moment, her hands still covering mine. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now, blanketing the street in white. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Something I haven't told you. Last week, before Richard showed up, I was offered a job, a real job, not just working for my ex-husband. It's at a marketing firm in Hartford. They want me to head up their new creative division." "Rebecca, that's amazing. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because it would mean leaving Millbrook. It's moving to a new city, starting completely over. And because, she paused, looking directly at me. Because I realized that somewhere along the way, you'd become part of my decision-making process. Not in the way Richard was, not controlling or manipulating, but as someone whose opinion matters to me. My heart started beating faster. Starts in January. They're giving me until Friday to decide. What do you want to do? I want to take it. I want to move to Hartford and build a life that's entirely mine. I want to wake up every morning in a place where nobody knows me as Richard's ex-wife or the woman who's having a midlife crisis. I want to be just Rebecca. Figuring out what comes next. The implications of what she was saying hit me like a punch to the chest. She was leaving. In less than 2 months, she'd be gone, and our strange, wonderful friendship would be just a memory. "That's incredible," I managed to say. "You should absolutely take it." She studied my face carefully. "There's one more thing." I braced myself. "There. Also looking for freelance writers. People who can create content, tell stories, help build their brand. The pay is good, and it would be mostly remote work. But they'd want someone who could collaborate closely with the creative team." It took me a moment to understand what she was suggesting. "Rebecca, I'm not asking you to follow me. I'm not asking you to make a decision based on me. But I'm asking if you might want to consider whether staying in Millbrook is really what's best for your life. Or if you're just staying because it's easier than choosing something new." The room suddenly felt very small.
Oh.
Everything I'd built here, small as it was, suddenly seemed like a house of cards that could be blown over by the slightest wind. "I can't ask you to do that," I said. "You're not asking. I'm offering. There's a difference." She stood up and walked to my kitchen counter, pulling a business card from her purse. "This is the contact information for the HR director. Is Patricia Morrison. If you're interested, you could call her, talk about freelance opportunities, see if it's something that might work for you." She set the card on the counter and picked up her coat. "Where are you going?" "Home. You need time to think, and I need to make a decision about my own life without worrying about how it affects anyone else." She paused at the door. "Marcus, whatever you decide, I want you to know that these past few weeks have been the best part of my year. You helped me remember who I am, and I'll always be grateful for that." "Rebecca, wait." She turned back. "What if I'm not ready? What if I'm not brave enough to start over somewhere new?" Her smile was gentle, understanding. "Then you're not ready, and that's okay. But don't let fear make the decision for you. Don't let Richard Walsh or anyone else convince you that I don't know my own mind." After she left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the business card. Patricia Morrison, Human Resources Director, Creative Marketing Solutions, a phone number, an email address, a doorway to a completely different life. I thought about my apartment, with its second-hand furniture. In view of the hardware store, I thought about my routine, my coffee shop table, my predictable days. I thought about the article I was supposed to be writing about Henderson's hardware, and how I'd been putting it off for weeks because I couldn't summon any enthusiasm for it. Then I thought about Rebecca, driving to the coast alone for the first time in decades. About the way her face lit up when she was trying something new. About the person she was becoming when no one was telling her who she should be. I picked up my phone and called Emma. "Please tell me you're calling to say you've come to your senses," she said by way of greeting. "Emma, what if coming to my senses means admitting that I've been playing it safe my entire life?" There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" I told her about the job offer, about Rebecca's proposition, about the choice I was facing. Emma listened without interrupting, which I took as a good sign. "Marcus," she said when I finished, "are you in love with this woman?" The question hung in the air. I'd been avoiding asking it myself, afraid of the answer. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe, but that's not why I'm considering this." "Then why are you?" "'Cause for the first time in my life, I have a chance to choose adventure over security, to choose possibility over predictability. And I'm terrified that if I don't take it, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering what might have happened." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "You know what?" she said finally. "It's time you scared yourself a little bit." After we hung up, I walked to my window and looked out at the snow-covered street. Millbrook looked peaceful, comfortable, safe. It was a good place to heal from a broken marriage, a good place to figure out who you were after everything you were. Thought you knew about yourself, turned out to be wrong. But maybe it wasn't a good place to figure out who you could become. I picked up Patricia Morrison's business card and my phone. Before I could lose my nerve, I dialed the number. "Creative Marketing Solutions. This is Patricia." "Ms. Morrison, my name is Marcus Bennett. I'm a freelance journalist, and I understand you might be looking for writers." "Marcus Bennett?" "Actually, yes. Rebecca Walsh mentioned you might be calling. Do you have time to talk?" The phone interview with Patricia Morrison lasted 45 minutes. By the time I hung up, I had a freelance contract offer, start date of January 15th, and a decision deadline of Friday afternoon. The same deadline Rebecca had been given. It wasn't a coincidence. Wednesday arrived gray and bitter cold. I'd spent Tuesday wrestling with the decision, making lists of pros and cons, calling Emma 3 more times, and generally driving myself crazy with overthinking. By Wednesday morning, I knew what I wanted to do. I just wasn't sure I was brave enough to do it. I was walking to the coffee shop when I saw the car. A black BMW parked across from my building, windows tinted, engine running. Something about it felt wrong, predatory. I slowed my pace, watching. The driver's door opened and Richard Walsh stepped out. He was not what I'd expected. Me, probably 5'8", with graying hair and an expensive suit that couldn't quite hide the fact that he'd grown soft around the middle. But there was something in his posture, in the way he carried himself, that radiated entitlement. This was a man accustomed to getting his way. Mr. Bennett. He approached me with a calculated smile, extending his hand. "I'm glad we finally have a chance to meet face to face." I didn't take his hand. "Mr. Walsh?" His smile faltered slightly. "I was hoping we could have a conversation, man to man." "I told you on the phone I don't think we have anything to discuss." "Oh, but we do." His voice remained pleasant, but there was an edge to it now. "You see, my wife has been offered a very attractive position in Hartford. I'm sure she's mentioned it. She's not your wife anymore. Okay, temporary situation, I assure you. Becca and I have been together for over 20 years. We've weathered difficulties before. This is just another rough patch. She divorced you. She filed papers when she was emotional and hurt. Understandable given the circumstances. But now that she's had time to think clearly, I'm confident we can work things out." He paused, studying my face. "Unless, of course, someone is encouraging her to make decisions that aren't in her best interest." The accusation was clear. I felt my jaw tighten. Rebecca is an adult. She can make her own choices, can't she? Because from where I stand, it looks like she's being manipulated by someone who's taking advantage of her vulnerability. His voice was still calm, conversational, but his eyes had gone cold. Someone who's probably told her exactly what she wants to hear. That age doesn't matter. That she deserves better. That she should throw away 2 decades of marriage for a fantasy. Is that what you think this is? A fantasy? I think it's a midlife crisis being enabled by a man who doesn't understand the damage he's causing. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea what Rebecca was like when I met her? Scattered, impulsive, making terrible decisions. She needed structure, guidance, someone to help her reach her potential. She needed someone to control her. I provided stability, security, a good life. And yes, sometimes that meant making difficult decisions for both of us. That's what marriage is, Mr. Bennett. Compromise, sacrifice, something you clearly don't understand. Given your own track record, the comment about my divorce hit like a slap. You don't know anything about my marriage? I know it failed. I know you're projecting your own issues onto my relationship with Rebecca. And I know that encouraging her to run away to Hartford isn't going to solve either of your problems. He knew about the job offer, of course he knew.
No.
Did you, Rebecca, and I still share financial accounts? Saw the contract offer from Creative Marketing Solutions? I also saw that they're looking for freelance writers. His smile was predatory now. Quite a coincidence, don't you think? My stomach dropped. He was making it sound like Rebecca had orchestrated the whole thing. Like she'd manipulated the job opportunity to get me to follow her. It's not what you think, isn't it? A lonely divorcee finds herself a younger man and arranges for him to follow her to a new city. It's a textbook, really. She gets to feel desirable again, and you get to feel like you're rescuing someone. Very romantic, very naive. Rebecca isn't like that. Rebecca's exactly like that. She's always been a romantic, always believed in fairy tales. That's what got her into trouble before we met, and it's what's getting her into trouble now. He straightened his tie, the gesture casual but somehow threatening. The difference is, this time, there are consequences. What kind of consequences? Legal ones. You see, Rebecca doesn't own our house outright. The mortgage is in both our names, and there are financial obligations that need to be resolved before she can simply run off to start a new life. If she takes this job in Hartford, if she tries to establish residency in Connecticut, it could complicate our divorce proceedings significantly. The threat was clear. He would use their shared assets to trap her in legal battles that could drag on for years. You can't do that. I can do whatever is necessary to protect my interests, and ultimately, Rebecca's interests. She's not thinking clearly right now, but eventually, she'll come to her senses. And when she does, I'll be here. I felt something cold and furious rising in my chest. You're going to use legal manipulation to force her to stay married to you? I'm going to use every resource at my disposal to keep my wife from making the biggest mistake of her life. She's not your wife. She'll be again, once this fantasy runs its course. Once you disappoint her, the way you disappointed your own wife. Once she realizes that starting over at 46 is harder than it looks, his smile was genuinely cruel now. Face it, Mr. Bennett, you're in a transitional relationship, away. For her to feel attractive and desired before she comes back to reality, the question is whether you're going to drag this out and make it painful for everyone, or whether you're going to be a gentleman and step aside. I wanted to hit him. The urge was so strong that I had to clench my fists to keep from acting on it, but hitting him would only prove his point about my character. I think this conversation is over, I said. I think you're right. But Mr. Bennett, consider this a friendly warning. Rebecca and I have a history, shared assets, mutual friends. You're a stranger in her life, a temporary distraction. If you really care about her, you'll consider what's best for her long term. Happiness. Got back in his car and drove away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk in the cold. My mind racing. I needed to see Rebecca. I needed to tell her about this conversation, about Richard's threats. I needed to understand whether there was any truth to what he'd said about the job offer. But when I got to the coffee shop, she wasn't there. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. I drove to her house. Her car was in the driveway. But when I knocked on the door, no one answered. Finally, I texted her. Richard came to see me. We need to talk. The response came 20 minutes later. I know. Can you meet me at Riverside Park? By the old bridge? It's important. Riverside Park was on the outskirts of town, a quiet place with walking trails and a small covered bridge that crossed a narrow creek. November with most of the leaves fallen and the air sharp with coming winter. It felt isolated, almost desolate. I found Rebecca sitting on a bench near the bridge, staring at the dark water. She was wearing her heavy winter coat, and her hands were buried deep in her pockets. How long have you been here? I asked, sitting down beside her. About an hour. I needed to think. Rebecca, I need to tell you about my conversation with Richard. Know what he said to you? Said the same things to me this morning? Her voice was flat, emotionless. Told me that if I take the Hartford job, he'll contest the divorce. He'll claim I'm abandoning our shared assets, that I'm mentally unstable. I'm being manipulated by someone with ulterior motives. Can he do that? He can try. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and ultimately futile, but he could make my life miserable for the next year or two. She turned to look at me. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I nodded. Did you know about the freelance position before I mentioned it to you? No, I swear, Rebecca, I had no idea. Because Richard seems to think that you and I orchestrated this whole thing. That I manipulated the job opportunity to get you to follow me to Hartford. The hurt in her voice was evident. Do you believe? That I don't know what to believe anymore. Everything has happened so fast. Now Richard is making it sound like I'm some desperate older woman throwing herself at a younger man who's just humoring me. I felt something break open in my chest. Rebecca, look at me. She turned, and I could see tears in her eyes. I didn't know about the job. I didn't orchestrate anything. You are not some desperate woman throwing herself at anyone. You are the strongest, bravest person I've met in years. You've rebuilt your entire life from scratch, and you've done it with grace and courage and joy. Then why does it feel like everything is falling apart? Because Richard is trying to make you doubt yourself. He's trying to convince you that you're not capable of making good decisions, that you need him to protect you from your own choices. It's what he's always done. She was quiet for a long moment, watching the water flow under the bridge. There's something else, she said finally. Something I haven't told you. I waited. Last week, before any of this happened, I went to see a therapist. Someone Richard doesn't know about. Someone who has no connection to our old life. She paused. I told her about you, about our friendship, about the list, about how I've been feeling. What did she say? She said that for the first time in our sessions. I sounded like someone who was living her own life instead of auditioning for someone else's approval. Rebecca's voice grew stronger. She said that healthy relationships, whether they're friendships or something more, don't require you to diminish yourself to make the other person comfortable. She's right, Marcus. I need to tell you something else. Something I've been afraid to say because I wasn't sure if it was real or if I was just projecting my own needs onto our friendship. My heart started beating faster. I think I'm falling. In love with you? The words hung in the air between us like a bridge that once crossed couldn't be uncrossed. Not because you're helping me rebel against my marriage, not because you're a safe harbor in a storm, but because when I'm with you, I feel like the person I was always meant to be, the person I lost somewhere along the way. I reached for her hand. It was cold, but her fingers curled around mine with certainty. Rebecca, I think I've been in love with you since that first day you asked me to dance in the coffee shop. Maybe even before that. Maybe since the first time I saw you wrap your hands around that coffee cup like you were trying to hold on to something warm in a cold world. She turned to face me fully. So what do we do now? Now we decide whether we're going to let Richard, Walsh, and everyone else's opinions determine our future, or whether we're going to trust ourselves enough to see where this goes. Even if it's messy, even if people talk, even if we don't know how it ends, especially then. She leaned against me, and I wrapped my arms around her. We sat there by the bridge as the late afternoon light faded to people who had finally found the courage to stop apologizing for wanting more from life. Marcus, yeah, I'm taking the job in Hartford. Good. Are you taking the freelance position? I thought about my apartment, my coffee shop routine, my safe, predictable life in Millbrook. Then I thought about waking up each morning with something to look forward to, someone to explore the world with, a future that felt like an adventure instead of a sentence. Yeah, I said, I am. Even though we don't know what this is yet, even though we might be making a huge mistake, Rebecca not taking the chance would be the mistake. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. So we walked back to our cars. Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and showed me the screen. It was from Richard. Last chance to reconsider. After tonight, I stopped being reasonable. Rebecca deleted the message without responding. Are you scared? It asked, terrified, she said. And I've never felt more sure of anything in my life. Friday morning arrived with crystalline clarity, the kind of December day where the air is so cold it burns your lungs. But the sky is so blue it makes you believe in possibilities. I had Exactly 8 hours to give Patricia Morrison my final answer about the Hartford position. Rebecca and I had agreed to meet one last time before making our decisions official. Not to influence each other, but to make sure we were both choosing from a place of strength rather than fear. The coffee shop felt different that morning. Mrs. Chen smiled knowingly when I ordered my usual black coffee. I realized that our story had probably been the subject of considerable speculation among the regulars. Small towns have few secrets, especially when those secrets involve two divorced people finding each other over Tuesday afternoon. Lat. Rebecca arrived at exactly 2:15 our old time. But instead of sitting at our usual tables, she walked directly to mine and sat down across from me. So, she said, setting down her cappuccino. Decision day. Decision day. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of us aware that this conversation would determine the trajectory of our lives. I've been thinking about what Richard said, she began, about us being a fantasy, about this whole thing being some kind of midlife crisis. My stomach tightened. And I realized he's partially right. I felt the ground shift beneath me. This is a fantasy, she continued, but not the kind he meant. It's the fantasy of being able to choose joy over security, being able to trust your own judgment even when everyone else thinks you're making a mistake, of believing that it's never too late to become who you were meant to be. Relief flooded through me. I called Patricia Morrison this morning, Rebecca said. I accepted the position. How does it feel? It's like jumping off a cliff. Terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. She reached across the table and took my hand. Marcus, I need you to know something. Whatever you decide about the freelance position, I'm taking this job, moving to Hartford, and I'm starting my life over. Not because of you, not in spite of you, but because it's what I need to do for myself. I squeezed her hand. I know. If you take the freelance position, if you come to Hartford with me, it has to be because it's what you want for your own life. Not because you think I need rescuing and not because you're afraid of being alone. Rebecca, can I tell you something? She nodded. Yesterday, after our conversation at the bridge, I drove around Millbrook for 2 hours. I looked at everything I'd be leaving behind. My apartment, the coffee shop, the familiar streets, my predictable life. I paused, gathering my thoughts, and you know what I realized? I wasn't looking at the things I'd built. I was looking at the places I'd been hiding, the routines I'd used to avoid making real choices about what I wanted from life. What do you want? I want to wake up next to someone who challenges me to be better than I was the day before. I want to build something new instead of just maintaining something safe. I want to write stories that matter instead of articles about hardware stores that I don't care about. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. I want adventure, Rebecca. Real adventure. The kind that scares you and changes you and makes you grateful to be alive. I lifted her hand to my lips and kissed it gently. I want all of that with you. So you're taking the job. I called Patricia an hour ago. I start January 15th, same as you. Rebecca laughed, the sound bright and free. We're really doing this. Really doing this? That's when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Coffee shop. 5 minutes. Come alone, our Richard. I showed Rebecca the message. Her expression hardened. He's not going to stop, she said. Until he gets what he wants, or until we make it clear that his opinion no longer matters. What do you want to do? She was quiet for a moment, then stood up with the kind of determination I'd come to associate with her best decisions. I want to face this head on. Together. We didn't have to wait long. Richard appeared in the doorway of the coffee shop, scanning the room until his eyes found us. He was dressed impeccably as always, but there was something frantic in his posture, something desperate. He walked over to our table with the forced confidence of a man trying to maintain control of a situation that was slipping away from him. Rebecca. Mr. Bennett. He didn't sit down. I assume you've both made your decisions. We have, Rebecca said calmly. And they're none of your business? Richard's composure cracked slightly. Rebecca, be reasonable. You're about to throw away 20 years of marriage for what? A few weeks of infatuation with someone you barely know. I'm about to start living my own life for the first time in 20 years. This isn't you talking. This is him. Richard gestured toward me with barely concealed contempt. He's filled your head with romantic nonsense about second chances and new beginnings. Actually, I said, standing up to face him, she's the one who taught me about second chances. She's the one who showed me what it looks like to choose courage over comfort. Courage, Richard laughed bitterly. You call running away courage? You call abandoning responsibility courage? I call choosing happiness over habit courage, Rebecca said, standing beside me. I call refusing to spend the rest of my life apologizing for wanting more than you were willing to give me courage. For the first time since I'd met him, Richard looked genuinely shaken. Rebecca, I love you. No, Richard, you love the idea of me. You love the version of me that never questioned your decisions, never challenged your authority, never wanted anything you didn't approve of first. Her voice was steady, final. But that person is gone. She's been gone for a long time, and I'm not bringing her back. Richard's face went through a series of expressions, anger, desperation, and finally something that might have been acceptance. So that's it? 22 years and you're walking away for someone you've known for? 2 months. I'm walking away from 22 years of being someone I'm not. What I'm walking toward is my choice to make. Richard looked at me one last time. You think you're getting the real Rebecca, but you're just getting the rebound version. The novelty wears off. When real life sets in, you'll see what I dealt with for 2 decades. I hope so, I said. Because the Rebecca I know, the real one, is extraordinary. And if that's what you've dealt with for 2 decades, then you're a fool for letting her go. Richard stared at us for a long moment, then turned and walked out of the coffee shop without another word. Rebecca and I sat back down, both of us slightly shaken by the confrontation. How do you feel? I asked. Free, she said simply. For the first time in years, I feel completely free. That evening, we celebrated with dinner at the nicest restaurant in Millbrook. Not because we were marking the end of something, but because we were toasting the beginning. To Hartford, Rebecca said, raising her glass of wine. To taking chances, I countered. To figuring it out as we go. We clinked glasses, and I felt something settle into place inside me. Not certainty, I wasn't sure what the future held for us, but confidence. Confidence that whatever came next, we'd face it together, honestly, bravely. Marcus? Yeah, thank you for seeing me, the real me. Thank you for helping me find the real me. Outside the restaurant window, snow was beginning to fall again, dusting the streets of Millbrook in white. 6 weeks we'd both be gone, starting new lives in a new city. It was terrifying and perfect, and exactly what we both needed. We'd chosen love over fear, adventure over safety, possibility over predictability, and for the first time in either of our lives, that felt like enough. 6 months later, I was sitting in a different coffee shop. This one was in downtown Hartford, with exposed brick walls and industrial lighting filled with young professionals and college students rather than retirees and small-town regulars. The energy was different here, faster, more ambitious, more anonymous. But some things remained. The same, Rebecca still ordered cappuccinos with extra foam. I still preferred black coffee, and we still met every Tuesday and Thursday, though now it was for lunch breaks rather than afternoon escapes. The transition hadn't been seamless. Moving to a new city, starting new jobs, building a relationship, while simultaneously rebuilding our individual lives, it was messier and more complicated than either of us had anticipated. We'd had arguments about whose turn it was to do laundry, disagreements about how much time to spend together versus apart, in moments of doubt when the magnitude of what we'd chosen felt overwhelming. But we'd also had discoveries. I learned that Rebecca sang while she cooked, that she was terrible at parallel parking, but refused to ask for help, and that she had a secret weakness for reality TV shows she pretended to disdain. She learned that I was obsessively neat about my workspace but completely disorganized everywhere else, that I talked to myself while writing, and that I made the best pancakes she'd ever tasted. Most importantly, We'd learned how to fight and make up, how to give each other space without drifting apart, how to support each other's dreams without losing sight of our own. "Earth to Marcus," Rebecca said, waving her hand in front of my face. "You're doing that thing again." "What thing?" "That thing where you stare into space and get all philosophical. Usually means you're writing an article in your head or having deep thoughts about life." She was right. I'd been thinking about the article I was supposed to be writing for Creative Marketing Solutions blog. The topic was Reinventing Yourself After 35, a guide to major life changes. Patricia Morrison had assigned it to me specifically because of my own story. Just thinking about the reinvention piece. "How's it coming?" "Slowly. Turns out it's harder to write about your own life than you'd think." Rebecca laughed. "About it. Jennifer asked me to speak at next month's Women's Leadership Conference about my journey to empowerment. I keep trying to write the speech, but every time I start, I feel like I'm making it sound more dramatic than it actually was." Jennifer was Rebecca's boss, a sharp, nonsense woman in her 50s who'd built Creative Marketing Solutions from a 2-person startup into a regional powerhouse. She'd taken Rebecca under her wing from day one, recognizing in her the same hunger for meaningful work that had driven her own success. "Maybe that's the point," I said. "Maybe we make big life changes sound more dramatic than they need to be. Maybe the real story is simpler." "What do you mean?" I thought about it for a moment. "I mean, when people ask me how I knew it was time to leave Millbrook, they're expecting some grand epiphany. Some moment of clarity where the heavens opened and I suddenly understood my destiny. And instead it was just Tuesday afternoon in a coffee shop and someone asked me to dance. I said yes." Rebecca smiled. "That's it? That's your big wisdom about reinventing your life. That's it. Say yes to the things that scare you a little bit. Say yes to the people who see something in you that you've forgotten about yourself. Say yes to the possibility that you might be wrong about what you're capable of." Very profound, Bennett. You should put that in your article. Maybe I will. We finished our lunch and walked back toward our respective offices. Rebecca's building was glass and steel, all modern lines and corporate efficiency.
Wine was an old way.
Out of danger. And sometimes, the way forward is into some wine, while some why. Why some why? Rebecca. Bell. Rebecca. Berbecaris. Bailey. Birdies. Wise. I use. Why some why? Why? Why some why? I why. Converted warehouse with creaky floors and windows that didn't quite close properly. But I loved it. I loved the way the afternoon light slanted through the tall windows. Loved the sound of the old radiators. Loved the sense that the building itself had been reinvented from something industrial into something creative. "Dinner tonight, Rebecca?" asked as we reached the corner where our paths diverged. "I can't. I'm having dinner with Emma and David. They're in town for David's conference." "How's Emma adjusting to the new you better than expected?" "Turns out she's proud of me for taking a risk." "New." Rebecca kissed me goodbye, a quick, casual gesture that still made my heart skip a little. After 6 months, I still couldn't quite believe this was my life. That evening, I met Emma and David at a restaurant near their hotel. Emma looked exactly the same as always, put together, slightly skeptical, ready to offer advice whether I wanted it or not. But there was something different in the way she looked at me. Less worry, more respect. "You look good," she said as we sat down. "Relaxed. Happy. I am happy. It shows." She glanced around the restaurant, taking in the bustling atmosphere, the diverse crowd, the energy of the city. "Hartford suits you, thanks. And Rebecca, how are things going?" It was a loaded question. Emma had been cautious about my relationship. With Rebecca from the beginning, worried that I was rebounding into something complicated and potentially destructive. Things are good, really good. Taking it slow, figuring it out as we go. That's mature of you. David laughed. You don't have to sound so surprised about it. Emma blushed slightly. I am happy for you, Marcus. I was just worried that you were making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Maybe that was exactly what I needed to do. Maybe it was. We talked through dinner about work, about Emma's kids, about David's conference, normal family. Conversation, the kind I'd missed during the worst days of my divorce when every interaction felt charged with judgment or pity. As we were leaving the restaurant, Emma pulled me aside. Marcus, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you ever regret it? Leaving Millbrook? Taking such a big risk? I thought about the question seriously. I regret some things. I regret that it took me so long to figure out what I wanted. I regret the years I spent playing it safe because I was afraid of making mistakes, but not this. Not Rebecca. Not this. Not Rebecca. I paused. For the first time in my adult life, I'm living intentionally instead of just letting life happen to me. That feels like the opposite of a mistake. She hugged me then, fierce and quick. I'm proud of you. Thanks. That means a lot. After they left, I walked home through the city streets. Hartford at night was a different creature than Hartford during the day. Quieter but not empty, full of possibility and stories unfolding in the lit windows of apartments and office buildings. I thought about the article I was writing, about the speech Rebecca was preparing, about the strange path that had led us both here. 6 months ago, we'd been two broken people hiding in a coffee shop, afraid to want too much from life. Now we were building something together while still becoming ourselves individually. When I got home, Rebecca was already there, curled up. On the couch with her laptop and a cup of tea. She'd moved in 3 months ago. Not because we felt pressured to take the next step, but because it felt natural. We'd found a small apartment near downtown with hardwood floors and a kitchen window that looked out onto a tree-lined street. How was dinner? She asked, looking up from her screen. Good, Emma sends her love. How's the speech coming? I think I figured out what I want to say. Yeah. I want to talk about the difference between reinventing yourself and discovering yourself. She closed the laptop and looked at me. I spent 20 years trying to reinvent myself into someone my husband would approve of. But what I did, wasn't reinvention. It was discovery. Discovery of what? Of who I was before I started asking permission to exist. I sat down beside her on the couch. That's good. That's really good, Marcus. Yeah. Do you think we would have found each other eventually? If we hadn't both been divorced? Both been hiding in that coffee shop? Both been ready to take a risk? It was a question I'd wondered about myself. I don't know. Maybe we needed to be broken first, before we could be brave enough to be honest about what we wanted. Maybe we sat in comfortable silence for a while, her head on my shoulder, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Rebecca, I love you. She lifted her head to look at me. I love you too. It wasn't the first time we'd said it, but it still felt significant. Not because the words were new, but because they were true in a way that felt deeper each time we said them. That night, as I was falling asleep, I thought about the moral of our story. Not the neat, packaged moral that people expect from tales of second chances and middle-aged romance, but the real, messy, complicated moral that comes from actually living through a major life change. The moral wasn't that love conquers all, or that it's never too late to start over, or that you should follow your heart no matter the consequences. The moral was simpler and more practical. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit that the life you're living isn't the life you want. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop waiting for permission to be happy. And sometimes the most radical act of self-love is believing that you deserve more than what you've settled for, Rebecca. And I hadn't found each other because we were perfect, or because we had all the answers. We'd found each other because we were both finally ready to stop apologizing for wanting something real. And in the end, that willingness to be honest about our desires, to be vulnerable about our hopes, to be brave enough to say yes when life offered us something unexpected, That was what transformed us. Not the move to Hartford, not the new jobs, not even falling in love. It was the simple, revolutionary act of choosing ourselves. 6 months later, and I was still learning how to do that. We both were. But every morning when I woke up next to Rebecca, every time we made a decision together about our shared future, every time we supported each other through the inevitable challenges of building a life from scratch, I was reminded of the same truth. The best stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with, and they continued to choose each other day after day, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. That's the kind of love story worth telling. It's the kind of life worth living. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.